My world, for a time, was painted in hues of an almost unbelievable perfection, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and an undeniable sense of belonging. I remember the day I first met him, a seemingly innocuous encounter that, in hindsight, felt like the universe conspiring to place him directly in my path. He wasn't just handsome, he possessed an aura of effortless charm, a magnetic quality that drew people in, and me, most profoundly. His eyes, a warm shade of hazel, seemed to hold a depth of understanding I hadn't encountered before, and his smile, a slow, genuine curve of his lips, had the power to disarm any apprehension I might have harbored. From our very first conversation, it was clear we clicked. We talked for hours, the kind of conversation where time ceased to exist, where every topic flowed seamlessly into the next, revealing surprising commonalities and delightful differences that only added to the intrigue. He was, in every sense of the word, attentive. Not in an overbearing or suffocating way, but with a gentle, consistent focus that made me feel like the most important person in his universe. He listened, truly listened, to my stories, my dreams, my fears, and he remembered the smallest details. A passing comment about my favorite flower would result in a surprise bouquet delivered to my desk. A casual mention of a band I loved would lead to tickets to their next concert. These weren't grand, showy gestures designed for public display. They were intimate, personal acts of thoughtfulness that resonated deep within my soul. He had a way of making me feel utterly seen, understood, and cherished, a feeling I had yearned for but never fully experienced before. It was as if he held a mirror to my deepest desires, reflecting back a version of myself that was confident, loved, and complete. The early months of our relationship unfolded like a dream sequence from a romantic film. He whisked me away on spontaneous weekend getaways, each one more enchanting than the last. We explored quaint coastal towns, walked hand in hand through sun-drenched vineyards, and spent starlit nights by crackling bonfires, sharing stories and dreams until the early hours of dawn. He introduced me to his closest friends and family, seamlessly integrating me into his life, and I, in turn, felt an overwhelming desire to do the same. He spoke of a future with such certainty, such conviction, that I found myself believing in it with every fiber of my being. He would talk about the house we'd build, the adventures we'd embark on, the quiet evenings we'd spend together, growing old side by side. His words painted a vivid, irresistible picture of a shared destiny, a life intertwined with a depth and permanence I had only ever fantasized about. Perhaps the most poignant moments were when he shared fragments of his childhood. He spoke of growing up in a small, close-knit community, of summer days spent by the lake, of the mischievous pranks he pulled with his siblings. He recounted tales of his grandparents, painting vivid portraits of their enduring love and resilience. These weren't just anecdotes. They were intimate glimpses into the very fabric of his being, vulnerable revelations that he entrusted to me, and me alone. He spoke of a particular tree in his childhood backyard, a giant oak under which he'd spent countless hours dreaming and imagining his future. He described the texture of its bark, the way the sunlight filtered through its leaves, the feeling of peace it brought him. Sharing these cherished memories felt like an invitation into the most sacred chambers of his heart, a profound act of intimacy that cemented my belief that he was, without a shadow of a doubt, the one. He was everything I had ever hoped for, and more. My heart, once guarded, had opened completely, overflowing with a love and trust one believed would last a lifetime. I was utterly, irrevocably, and blissfully in love, convinced that I had finally found my soulmate, my partner in every sense of the word, and that our journey together had just begun. The future stretched out before us, a boundless expanse of shared happiness and unwavering devotion, but like a beautiful, fragile glass, even the most perfect dream can develop hairline cracks, imperceptible at first, then widening slowly, inexorably, until the entire structure threatens to shatter. The idyllic landscape of our early romance, once so vibrant and clear, began to blur around the edges, its colors subtly fading. It wasn't an abrupt change, no sudden, dramatic shift that would have immediately sounded alarm bells. Instead, it was a gradual erosion, a creeping chill that seeped into the warmth we had cultivated, leaving me feeling increasingly uneasy, as if a shadow had fallen over the bright future we had so carefully envisioned. The first signs were almost imperceptible, easy to dismiss as stress or a bad day, or simply the natural evolution of a relationship moving past the initial honeymoon phase. His attentiveness, once a constant, comforting presence, became sporadic. The way he used to look at me, with such focused intensity, began to waver, his gaze often drifting past me, or worse, through me. Our conversations, once so effortless and deep, grew shallower, punctuated by silences that felt less comfortable and more hollow. He would often be distracted, his phone a more compelling companion than my words, his mind seemingly miles away even when his body was right beside me. I'd find myself repeating questions, or trailing off mid-sentence, realizing he hadn't been listening at all. A knot of anxiety, small at first, began to form in the pit of my stomach, a persistent, low-level hum of unease. Then came the criticism. It started subtly, disguised as constructive feedback, a gentle suggestion that I might try a different outfit, or a slightly different approach to a problem. But the frequency increased, and the tone sharpened. What began as minor observations soon escalated into more direct, often cutting remarks about my appearance, my opinions, my choices. My laugh was too loud. My hair was too messy. My ideas were naive. He'd dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, or a condescending sigh. Each critical word chipped away at my confidence, eroding the sense of worth and beauty he had once so meticulously built up within me. I found myself constantly second-guessing everything, scrutinizing my reflection, replaying conversations in my head, desperately trying to pinpoint what I was doing wrong, what had changed. The woman who had felt so seen and cherished now felt scrutinized and judged, constantly falling short of an unspoken, ever-shifting standard. And then there was the flotation. This was perhaps the most painful and bewildering shift. The man who had once had eyes only for me, whose affection had been so singularly focused, now seemed to revel in the attention of others. At social gatherings, his gaze would linger on other women, his charming smile, once reserved for me, now freely offered to strangers. He'd engage in prolonged, overly familiar conversations, his hand often resting a moment too long on another woman's arm, his laughter a little too loud, a little too intimate. He would dismiss my discomfort, if I dared to voice it, as jealousy or insecurity, gaslighting me into believing my feelings were irrational and unfounded. He'd say, "It's just friendly, you're overreacting," or "Why are you so insecure? Don't you trust me?" These dismissals only intensified my pain, making me question my own perception of reality. I became a shadow of my former self, constantly on edge, desperate for a crumb of the affection he once showered upon me. I found myself performing, trying to recapture his attention, to elicit that familiar smile, that loving gaze. I'd dress meticulously, try to be wittier, more engaging, more agreeable. I'd initiate conversations, plan outings, anything to reignite the spark that seemed to be flickering into oblivion. But my efforts often felt futile, met with indifference or, worse, a thinly veiled annoyance. The emotional well from which I drew my strength began to run dry, leaving me feeling hollowed out, perpetually exhausted. The vibrant colors of our dream had faded to a dull gray, and the once perfect picture was now riddled with cracks, threatening to shatter at any moment. I was trapped in a cycle of yearning for a past that seemed increasingly distant, and a present that felt increasingly bleak, wondering endlessly what had gone so terribly wrong. The emotional toll of this insidious transformation was immense, a heavy cloak that settled over me, suffocating the vibrant spirit I once possessed. Each day felt like a battle fought on shifting sands, where victory was fleeting and defeat was a constant companion. I was perpetually on high alert, my senses finely tuned to every nuance of his behavior, every subtle shift in his mood. A casual glance in another woman's direction would send a jolt of anxiety through me. A dismissive tone in his voice would trigger a cascade of self-doubt. I found myself obsessively replaying past conversations, searching for clues, for the exact moment when the dream began to unravel. Was it something I said? Something I did? Or was it something inherently wrong with me? My self-esteem, once robust and nurtured by his initial adoration, withered under the constant barrage of criticism and indifference. I began to see myself through his increasingly critical eyes, flaws magnified, strengths diminished. The woman he had once made feel beautiful and confident now felt plain and inadequate. I stopped trusting my own judgment, my own feelings. If he said I was overreacting, Then surely I must be. If he said I was insecure, then perhaps it was true. The gaslighting was insidious, a slow poison that seeped into my mind, distorting my perception of reality until I questioned everything I knew to be true about myself and our relationship. I became a prisoner of his shifting moods, my own happiness contingent on his fleeting approval. The desperate yearning for his former affection became an all-consuming obsession. I found myself contorting my personality, suppressing my own desires and opinions, in a desperate attempt to win back the man he once was, the man I had fallen so deeply in love with. I'd try to anticipate his needs, to be the perfect girlfriend, the one who never complained, who always understood, who was effortlessly beautiful and endlessly accommodating. I'd spend hours agonizing over my appearance before he came over, choosing outfits that I thought he might approve of, trying new hairstyles, anything to catch his eye, to elicit a flicker of that old admiration. I'd cook his favorite meals, even if I didn't enjoy them. I'd agree to watch sports with him, even though I found them tedious. I'd laugh at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. I was constantly performing, constantly trying to prove my worth, to prove my love, to prove that I was enough. But my efforts were met with a frustrating, soul-crushing indifference. The more I tried, the further he seemed to retreat, his emotional distance growing into an unbridgeable chasm. It was like chasing a mirage in the desert. The closer I thought I got, the further it receded. The affection he once freely gave now felt like a precious commodity, something I had to earn, to beg for, and even then, it was rarely granted. A fleeting touch, a half-hearted compliment, a moment of shared laughter. These became rare treasures, clung to desperately, analyzed for hidden meaning, and then mourned when they inevitably faded. Each rejection, each dismissive glance, each cold shoulder, chipped away at my spirit, leaving me feeling increasingly hollowed out and emotionally drained. I was perpetually exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The constant anxiety, the relentless self-doubt, the endless striving for an affection that was no longer freely given. It was a relentless cycle that left me depleted. Sleep offered little respite, as my mind continued to race, replaying scenarios, dissecting conversations, searching for answers that never came. My friends noticed the change, their worried glances and gentle inquiries a stark contrast to his indifference. They saw the light dimming in my eyes, the forced smile that rarely reached them. I'd offer vague excuses, unwilling to admit the painful truth of what our relationship had become, still clinging to the hope that the man I loved would somehow reappear, that the dream would somehow mend itself. But deep down, a chilling realization was beginning to take root. The man I had fallen in love with was gone, perhaps he had never truly existed, and I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, desperate for an escape I couldn't yet see. The emotional bleeding was constant, and I felt myself slowly, agonizingly, draining away. The breaking point arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, insidious discovery that ripped through the last vestiges of my hope and trust. It was a Tuesday evening, a day like any other, or so I thought. He was in the living room, engrossed in his laptop, his back to me. I was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, the mundane rhythm of chopping vegetables a stark contrast to the churning unease in my stomach. A sudden, almost imperceptible shift in his posture, a subtle leaning in towards the screen, caught my attention. It was a familiar posture, one he adopted when deeply focused, but something about it felt different. A cold premonition, like a whisper of ice, snaked its way down my spine. I walked into the living room, feigning casualness, asking if he needed anything. He mumbled a distracted no, his eyes still glued to the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. As I moved past him, ostensibly to retrieve something from the bookshelf, my gaze inadvertently fell upon his laptop screen. What I saw sent a shockwave through my entire being, freezing me in place. It wasn't a news site, or a work document, or a game. It was a dating site. My breath hitched in my throat, a silent gasp that felt like a physical blow. The colors, the layout, the profile pictures, it was unmistakable. He was browsing profiles, his cursor hovering over various images, a look of detached interest on his face. My mind reeled, trying to process the image, to reconcile it with the man who had once promised me forever. Denial, swift and fierce, was my first instinct. Maybe it was an old account. Maybe he was just looking at a friend's profile. Maybe it was a joke. But the active scrolling, the focused attention, the subtle smirk that played on his lips, it screamed present, intentional engagement. My heart, already bruised and battered, felt like it had been physically seized and squeezed, the pain sharp and immediate. A cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. Then, a memory surfaced, sharp and vivid, cutting through the fog of shock. It was from early in our relationship, a time when he was still the charming, attentive man I adored. He had mentioned wanting to try online dating, just for fun, to see what it was like, before he met me. He had even asked for my help setting up an account, claiming he was technologically inept. I, naive and trusting, had sat beside him, guiding him through the process, helping him choose a profile picture, even suggesting a witty line for his bio. I remembered the password he chose, a simple, easy-to-recall combination of letters and numbers, something personal to him that he thought he'd never forget. At the time, it had seemed like a cute, shared secret, a testament to our burgeoning intimacy. Now, it felt like a cruel joke, a weapon he had unwittingly handed me. A flicker of something akin to cold resolve ignited within me, pushing past the initial wave of nausea and despair. My mind, usually clouded by emotion, suddenly became remarkably clear, focused with an almost terrifying precision. I retreated to the bedroom, my movements stiff and automatic, my face a mask of composure I didn't feel. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my own laptop, the familiar weight of it in my lap a grounding presence. My fingers, guided by an instinct born of betrayal, flew across the keyboard, navigating to the dating site I had just seen on his screen. With a deep, shaky breath, I typed in the username, his email address, and then the password. The one I had helped him choose. The one he thought I wouldn't remember. The one that was now the key to unlocking the full extent of his deception. Each character I typed felt like a step further into an abyss, but there was no turning back. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and dread. The screen loaded, and then, with a sickening lurch, I was in. I was logged into his profile. The world tilted on its axis, and the last fragile remnants of my belief in him shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The dream was not just cracked, it was utterly, irrevocably, destroyed. The moment his profile loaded, a wave of nausea washed over me, a sickening lurch that felt like my stomach had dropped to my feet. It was all there, laid bare before my eyes, a digital testament to his elaborate deception. His chosen profile picture, a deceptively charming shot of him smiling, radiating an approachable warmth that was now a bitter mockery. His carefully crafted bio, filled with witty anecdotes and seemingly genuine aspirations, painting a picture of a man seeking a meaningful connection, a man I had once believed him to be. Every word, every image, was a calculated lie, designed to ensnare unsuspecting women, just as it had ensnared me. My gaze, though blurred by the sudden onset of tears, was drawn immediately to the message inbox. It was overflowing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of messages, organized into various threads, each one a conversation with a different woman. My fingers, trembling violently, clicked on the first one, then the next, and the next. The sheer volume of his interactions was staggering, a dizzying whirlwind of flirtatious banter, casual inquiries, and explicit suggestions. He wasn't just browsing, he was actively, relentlessly, pursuing other women, casting a wide net into the digital sea, seemingly without a care in the world for the woman he was supposedly building a future with. As I scrolled through the conversations, a cold dread began to replace the initial shock. He was not only chatting with and meeting other women, but his interactions were deeply personal, intimate even. He was using the same charming lines, the same attentive questions, the same promises of a deep connection that he had used on me. He was arranging dates, discussing future plans, even exchanging phone numbers. Each message was a dagger to my heart, twisting the knife further with every new revelation. He was a master of deception, a chameleon adapting his persona to suit each new target, weaving a web of lies with effortless ease. But the true gut punch, the revelation that sent a searing pain through my chest, came when I stumbled upon conversations where he spoke about *me*. Not in a flattering light, not with affection, but with a cruel, dismissive contempt that left me breathless. He referred to me as the clingy ex, even though we were still together, living under the same roof. He complained about my insecurities, the very insecurities he had so meticulously cultivated through his own behavior. He described me as boring and needy, painting a picture of a woman he was trapped with, a burden he was desperate to shed. He even mocked my appearance, making crude jokes about my weight and my fashion sense, the very things he had subtly criticized to my face. The words were like venom, burning through me, leaving a trail of devastation. The man who had once made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world was now openly ridiculing me to strangers. The man who had promised to cherish me was actively tearing me down, reducing me to a caricature of my worst fears. The betrayal was not just about the cheating. It was about the utter contempt, the malicious intent behind his words. It was a complete dismantling of my reality, a brutal revelation that the man I loved, the man I had given my entire heart to, was a stranger, a cruel imposter who had worn a mask of affection only to discard it when it suited him. Hours blurred into a haze of tears, each fresh revelation fueling a deeper well of despair. I sat there, hunched over the laptop, the screen reflecting my tear-streaked face, the glowing words of his betrayal burning into my retina. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on my chest, a constant ache behind my eyes. My body trembled uncontrollably, a visceral reaction to the profound shock and heartbreak. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes were swollen and gritty, until there were no more tears left to shed. The emotional drainage was complete, leaving me feeling utterly hollowed out, a vacant shell of the woman I once was. But as the last tears finally dried, a strange shift occurred. The suffocating despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard emptiness. And then, slowly, meticulously, a new emotion began to take root, pushing through the wreckage of my shattered heart. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was a chilling resolve, a quiet determination that solidified into a singular, unwavering purpose. The tears had cleansed me, leaving behind a stark clarity. The pain had sharpened my focus. He had broken me, yes, but in doing so, he had also forged something new within me. A steely, unyielding desire for retribution. The game wasn't over. It had just begun, and I was about to change the rules. The cold resolve that settled in my heart was not born of impulsive rage, but of a deep, calculated certainty. It was a clarity that emerged from the ashes of my shattered trust, a chilling calm after the storm of tears. My mind, previously clouded by grief and confusion, now operated with an almost surgical precision. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it fueled a singular, unwavering purpose: to get even. Not with a petty act of vengeance, but with a meticulously planned, deeply personal retribution that would strike at the very core of his narcissistic ego. I closed his dating profile, the sight of it now a vile reminder of his deceit. My fingers, steady now, navigated to a new tab. I knew the landscape of these sites, having helped him navigate one. The process was familiar, almost disturbingly so. I began to create a new profile, but this time it would be my creation, a weapon disguised as an invitation. I chose a different dating site, one I hadn't seen him actively using, to minimize immediate suspicion. Every detail was carefully considered, every choice deliberate. The profile picture was crucial. I didn't want to use my own, obviously. I found a stock photo online, a picture of a woman who was attractive, but in a subtly different way than me. Someone who was appealing, but not overtly glamorous, someone he might be drawn to but wouldn't immediately connect to me. I chose a woman with dark hair and striking eyes, a confident smile, but with a hint of mystery. The goal was to create an image that was alluring enough to pique his interest, yet generic enough to be believable as a new, independent person. Next came the bio. This was where the real artistry would lie. I crafted a persona that was a subtle blend of qualities I knew he found attractive, mixed with just enough unique quirks to make her seem authentic. She was intelligent, with a career that sounded impressive but not intimidating. She was adventurous, hinting at a love for travel and new experiences, mirroring some of the early interests he had feigned with me. She was independent, but also expressed a desire for a genuine connection, playing into the narrative he often spun about seeking a soulmate. I sprinkled in a few specific, seemingly innocuous details that would resonate with his known interests, a love for a particular type of music, a subtle reference to a hobby he enjoyed. The goal was to make her irresistible to him specifically. I wanted him to feel an immediate, undeniable pull towards this fabricated woman. I spent hours refining the profile, tweaking words, adjusting images, ensuring every detail was perfect. It was a strange, almost surreal experience, pouring so much creative energy into constructing a lie. But it wasn't just a lie, it was a trap, meticulously designed to ensnare its target. I imagined him scrolling through profiles, his eyes scanning for the next conquest, and then, his gaze landing on her star. The thought sent a jolt of satisfaction through me, a grim precursor of the revenge to come. Once the profile was complete, I took a deep breath. The next step was to initiate contact. I knew his habits, his typical online hours. I waited until I knew he would be online, likely browsing for new women. Then, with a click of the mouse, I sent him a message from my newly created profile. The message itself was simple, a seemingly innocent opening line, a comment on something in his profile that would suggest genuine interest. "Your bio really caught my eye," I typed. "I love how you mentioned specific hobby. I'm a big fan too." It was designed to be flattering, yet not overly aggressive, to draw him in without appearing too eager. I watched, my heart thumping a steady rhythm against my ribs as the message was sent. Now, the waiting game began. I knew he would respond. His ego wouldn't allow him not to. He thrived on attention, on validation, and this new, intriguing woman would be too tempting to resist. The anticipation was a strange mix of anxiety and grim satisfaction. I was about to embark on a journey of calculated deception, turning his own manipulative tactics against him. This wasn't just about hurting him, it was about making him feel the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being played, the unsettling realization that he was not as clever as he thought. This was just the beginning. The first hook had been cast, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that he would bite. The trap was set, the bait meticulously laid. Now, all that remained was to wait for him to take it. The hours that followed felt like an eternity, each minute stretched taut with anticipation. I tried to distract myself, to focus on mundane tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to the fake profile, to the message I had sent. Would he see it? Would he respond? The logical part of me knew he would. His patterns were predictable, his ego insatiable. But an underlying tremor of anxiety persisted, a fear that somehow he might deviate from the script I had so carefully written for him. Then, a notification pinged on my phone. My heart leaped, a sudden jolt of adrenaline. It was a message from the dating site. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. It was him. He had responded. A grim smile touched my lips. He had taken the bait. His message was exactly what I expected. Charming, confident, a little bit flirtatious, but not overly aggressive. He thanked me for the compliment, elaborated slightly on the hobby I had mentioned, and then smoothly transitioned into asking about me. "So, tell me a little about yourself," he wrote. "What brings a fascinating woman like you to this site?" It was a standard opening, designed to encourage a response, to draw me into his carefully constructed persona. He was playing the role of the attentive, interested man, the same role he had played with me in the beginning. The irony was not lost on me. I took a moment, composing my reply carefully. I needed to maintain the persona of the attractive, intriguing woman I had created. My responses were warm, engaging, and just a little bit mysterious. I revealed enough to keep him interested, but always left him wanting more. I mirrored his conversational style, using similar turns of phrase, subtle compliments, and open-ended questions that would encourage him to talk about himself, his favorite subject. I knew he loved to be the center of attention, to feel admired and understood. So, I played into that, asking questions about his passions, his dreams, his unique perspective on life. The back and forth began, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. We exchanged messages over the next few days, sometimes for hours at a time. He became increasingly invested, his messages growing longer, more personal, more eager. He shared anecdotes about his life, his work, his aspirations, all the while subtly weaving in compliments about my wit, my intelligence, my captivating personality. He was clearly intrigued, hooked by the carefully crafted illusion. He started to express how rare it was to find someone so compatible, someone he felt such an immediate connection with. It was the same script, the same lines, the same emotional manipulation he had used on me. And with each message, the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth grew stronger, but so did the cold satisfaction. After a few days of intense messaging, he made the move I knew he would. He suggested meeting. His message was casual, yet eager. "I've really enjoyed getting to know you through these messages," he wrote, "but I'm a firm believer that true chemistry can only be felt in person. Would you be open to grabbing a coffee sometime this week?" My heart gave a strange lurch, a mix of triumph and a lingering sense of unease. This was it. The moment of truth. I feigned a moment of hesitation, replying that I was a little shy about meeting online, but then, after a little convincing, a few more eager messages from him, I agreed. I suggested a public place, a popular cafe in the city centre, knowing it would be busy and afford me the anonymity I needed. I also made sure to pick a time when I knew he would be free, based on his usual schedule. I gave him a vague description of myself, something that was just specific enough to be helpful, but also broad enough to allow for misinterpretation. "I'll be wearing a dark coat and a red scarf," I typed, "and I have dark hair." The date was set. The trap was fully sprung. As I sent the confirmation message, a wave of adrenaline surged through me. My hands were clammy, my pulse racing. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself, about turning the tables on the man who had so carelessly shattered my world. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of his impending humiliation, and the thought, though chilling, was undeniably empowering. The stage was set for the first act of his public downfall. The day of our scheduled date dawned with a crisp, autumnal chill, mirroring the cold resolve that had settled deep within me. My stomach churned with a mixture of nervous anticipation and grim satisfaction. This was it, the first real-world execution of my meticulously crafted plan. I spent the morning preparing, not for a romantic encounter, but for a covert operation. My disguise needed to be effective, allowing me to observe him without any chance of recognition. I pulled out clothes I rarely wore, items that would significantly alter my usual silhouette and style. A chunky knit beanie that obscured most of my hair, a pair of oversized sunglasses that hid half my face, and a loose, shapeless trench coat that swallowed my figure. I even considered a different pair of shoes, anything to break my familiar gait. I practiced in front of the mirror, turning my head, observing how the light caught my face, ensuring no familiar features would give me away. It was a bizarre, almost theatrical exercise, transforming myself into a phantom observer. I arrived at the bustling city cafe almost an hour early, giving myself ample time to scout the location and choose the perfect vantage point. The cafe was exactly as I had envisioned, a vibrant hub of activity, filled with the murmur of conversations, the clatter of cups, and the rich aroma of coffee. It was a place where one could easily blend into the background, where a lone figure observing from a corner would go unnoticed. I found a small, discreet table tucked away in a shadowed alcove, offering a clear view of the entrance and the main seating area, yet shielded from direct sightlines. I ordered a large latte, a prop to make me appear like any other patron, and settled in, my heart thrumming a steady, anxious beat. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. I watched the entrance, my senses heightened, my mind racing through every possible scenario. What if he didn't show up? What if he recognized me despite my disguise? The anxiety was a tight knot in my chest, but I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. Then, just 10 minutes before our scheduled meeting time, I pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over his contact, the real one, the one saved under his name. With a deep breath, I dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful, unsuspecting. "Hey, what's up?" he asked. "Hey," I replied, feigning a casual tone, trying to keep my voice light and normal. "Just calling to see what you're up to. I was thinking about grabbing dinner tonight, if you're free." There was a slight pause on his end, a microsecond of hesitation. Then, his voice, smooth and practiced, came back. "Oh, hey. Yeah, I'm actually really swamped today, babe. Got a ton of work to catch up on, and then I promised my buddy I'd help him with something. Definitely can't make dinner tonight, unfortunately. A cold, bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it down. Oh, okay, I said, trying to sound disappointed but understanding. No worries. Just thought I'd ask. Maybe tomorrow. Yeah, maybe tomorrow, he said, his voice already moving on, eager to end the call. I'll let you know. Gotta run, busy day. Okay, talk later, I said, and hung up. My hand trembled slightly as I placed the phone back on the table. The lie, delivered so effortlessly, so convincingly, was a stark reminder of the depth of his deceit. He was swamped, busy, helping a buddy. All while preparing to meet another woman, a woman who was, in fact, me. Moments later, as if on cue, he walked through the cafe doors. My breath caught in my throat. He was dressed meticulously, his hair perfectly styled, a confident, almost expectant look on his face. He scanned the room, his eyes searching, a subtle eagerness in his posture. He pulled out his phone, checked the time, then looked around again, a slight frown creasing his brow. He fidgeted, adjusted his jacket, clearly growing impatient. Then, his gaze landed on a woman sitting alone at a table near the window. She had dark hair, vaguely fitting the description I had given. He straightened his shoulders, a hopeful smile spreading across his face, and began to walk towards her, his stride confident, his eyes fixed on his perceived target. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of anticipation. This was it. The moment of his public humiliation. He approached her, a charming smile on his face, and leaned in to speak. I watched, a chilling satisfaction spreading through me, as the woman looked up, a confused expression on her face, and then, with a shake of her head, clearly rebuffed him. He stammered something, his shoulders slumping slightly, before turning away, defeated, and eventually leaving the cafe, his confident swagger replaced by a dejected slump. The scene played out exactly as I had envisioned, a perfect, public rejection. The first domino had fallen. The sight of him walking out of the cafe, his shoulders slumped in defeat, was a potent elixir for my bruised spirit. The confident swagger he usually carried had vanished, replaced by a visible dejection. He glanced back once, a quick, almost desperate scan of the room, before pushing through the doors and disappearing into the bustling street. I watched him go, a strange mix of triumph and a lingering, bitter ache swirling within me. The first act of my revenge was complete, and the taste of it, though complex, was undeniably satisfying. I remained in my discreet corner for a few more minutes, allowing the adrenaline to subside and ensuring he was truly gone. The cafe, once a stage for his humiliation, now felt like a quiet sanctuary. I savored the moment, letting the image of his crestfallen face imprint itself on my mind. It was a stark contrast to the smug, self-assured expression he usually wore, and it was a sight I knew I would cherish. Once I was sure he was out of sight, I gathered my things, the oversized sunglasses and beanie still firmly in place. I walked out of the cafe, blending seamlessly back into the anonymous crowd, a ghost in the city, carrying my secret triumph. The autumn air felt sharper, crisper, as if the world itself had exhaled in recognition of the turn of events. I returned home, the quiet of the apartment a stark contrast to the bustling cafe. He wasn't there, of course. He was likely still reeling from his failed date, perhaps trying to rationalize what had happened. I gave him some time, allowing the sting of rejection to fully set in, to fester in his narcissistic ego. I wanted him to feel the full weight of being stood up, of being dismissed, of being found unattractive. After a couple of hours, when I judged the timing to be perfect, I logged back into the fake dating profile. My fingers, steady and deliberate, composed a message to him. This was the final, crucial blow for this particular encounter, designed to twist the knife just a little deeper. "Hey," I typed, feigning a casual, almost apologetic tone. "So sorry about standing you up earlier. Something came up last minute, and I just couldn't make it." I paused, allowing that initial lie to sink in. Then came the real sting. "Honestly though," I continued, "I did manage to swing by the cafe for a quick minute, just to see if I could spot you. And well, I did." I let that hang in the air, imagining his reaction on the other end. His curiosity would be piqued, his ego already bruised, now bracing for impact. Then I delivered the final, calculated blow. "No offense," I wrote, "but you just weren't really what I was expecting. You seemed a bit different from your pictures. A little less charismatic in person, I guess. And honestly, I just didn't find you very attractive. So, I decided to just leave. Again, really sorry for the inconvenience, but I just don't think we're a match." I reread the message, ensuring every word carried the precise weight of dismissal and subtle insult. It wasn't overtly cruel, but it was devastatingly effective. It targeted his vanity, his perceived charm, his very attractiveness, the pillars of his self-worth. It implied that he wasn't just stood up, but actively rejected after a brief, disapproving glance. It also subtly suggested that he was the problem, not the circumstances. I sent the message. A few minutes later, I saw the read receipt. Then, a reply came through. His response was predictably defensive, yet trying to maintain an air of nonchalance. "Oh, no worries at all," he typed, a little too quickly. "Totally understand things come up. And hey, no hard feelings about the attraction thing, everyone has their preferences, right? I'm sure you're a great person, just not for me either, I guess. Good luck with your search." He was pretending to be fine, to be unaffected, to project an image of cool indifference. But I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within me, that my words had hit their mark. His narcissistic ego, so meticulously inflated, had been pricked, deflated by the casual, yet pointed rejection. The carefully constructed facade of his online persona had been called into question, and he had been found wanting. The sting of being stood up was one thing. The sting of being seen and rejected was another entirely. This was just the beginning. The first taste of his own medicine. And I was already planning the next dose. The success of the first operation, the quiet satisfaction of witnessing his public humiliation and then delivering the final, ego-crushing blow via message, was intoxicating. It was a potent antidote to the months of emotional torment I had endured. A new kind of energy surged through me, a focused determination that replaced the lingering exhaustion. This wasn't just about one incident, it was about a pattern, a systematic dismantling of his carefully constructed world of deceit. My mind, now fully engaged in this intricate game, began to strategize. One rejection wasn't enough. It was a good start, a powerful opening salvo, but he was resilient in his narcissism. He would likely rationalize it, dismiss it as a fluke, convince himself that the woman was simply crazy or had bad taste. To truly make an impact, to truly make him feel the pervasive insecurity he had inflicted upon me, I needed to repeat the scheme. Not once, not twice, but relentlessly. I needed to become a ghost in his online dating world, an omnipresent force of rejection that he could never quite pin down. Over the next few weeks, I embarked on a meticulous campaign of digital sabotage. I created new fake online dating profiles, each one distinct from the last. I varied the names, the ages, the professions, the interests, and most importantly, the profile pictures. I scoured stock photo sites for images of women who were attractive in different ways. A blonde, a redhead, someone with a more bohemian look, someone with a corporate vibe. Each persona was carefully crafted to appeal to different facets of his presumed preferences, ensuring he wouldn't easily connect them back to a single source. I spent hours writing new bias, new opening lines, new conversational quirks for each fabricated identity. It was like inhabiting multiple characters, each one designed to lure him into my web. The process became almost routine, a dark ritual I performed with chilling precision. I would identify a new dating site he might be using, or simply create a new profile on one he was already active on. I'd initiate contact, using a subtly different approach each time, always flattering, always intriguing. He, predictably, would respond, his ego drawn to the fresh attention like a moth to a flame. The back-and-forth messaging would ensue, a carefully managed conversation where I would build rapport, feign interest, and slowly, inexorably, guide him towards the inevitable. Then came the moment of setting the date. Each time, I chose a different public location, a new cafe, a different park bench, a specific restaurant. I varied the times, the days of the week, ensuring no discernible pattern emerged. And each time, I ensured he was either stood up, cancelled on at the last minute, or faced an awkward encounter. The stand-up was my preferred method. It allowed me to be present, to observe his growing frustration and public humiliation firsthand. I'd arrive early, disguised in a new combination of accessories, a different hat, a new pair of glasses, a scarf pulled high over my face. I'd watch him arrive, full of anticipation, scan the room, check his phone, and then slowly, visibly, deflate as the minutes ticked by and his date never materialized. I watched him fidget, pace, nervously check his watch, his initial eagerness replaced by a growing sense of confusion and embarrassment. Sometimes, he'd even try to approach other women who vaguely fit the description, only to be politely, or sometimes not so politely, rebuffed. Each time, I would call him from my real phone just moments before the scheduled meeting, feigning a trivial reason for the call, listening to him lie about his whereabouts, knowing full well he was sitting alone, waiting for a woman who would never arrive. Other times, I would cancel at the very last minute, sending a message from the fake profile just as he was likely on his way. So incredibly sorry. Something urgent just came up. Can't make it tonight. So sorry for the late notice. The goal was to cause maximum inconvenience and frustration, to make him feel like his time was being wasted, his efforts futile. And occasionally, I would orchestrate an awkward encounter, perhaps by giving a vague description that led him to approach the wrong person, or by having the fake profile send a message claiming to have seen him but found him not what I was looking for from afar. Each successful operation, each instance of his public humiliation, was a small victory, a balm to the wounds he had inflicted. I reveled in the subtle shift in his demeanor at home, the slight edge of paranoia in his voice when he spoke about his online dating experiences, the way he'd nervously check his phone, the growing frustration evident in his sighs. He was beginning to feel the constant insecurity, the gnawing doubt, the pervasive sense of being played, that I had lived with for months. My silence, my feigned ignorance of his online life, only amplified his confusion. He had no idea he was dancing on the strings of a puppet master he lived with. This was just the beginning of his unraveling. The campaign of digital sabotage continued for weeks, perhaps even months, a relentless, invisible assault on his carefully constructed ego. I lost count of the exact number of times I orchestrated these encounters. 10, 12, perhaps even more. Each one was a meticulously planned operation, a new persona, a new location, a new twist on the rejection. My life became a strange dichotomy. On the surface, I was still his girlfriend, living under the same roof, feigning ignorance of his online escapades. Beneath that facade, I was his silent tormentor, a phantom presence in his digital dating world, a constant source of frustration and public humiliation. The repetition was key. 1 or 2 failed dates, he could dismiss. But a consistent, inexplicable string of rejections, cancellations, and awkward encounters began to chip away at his self-assurance. I noticed subtle changes in him. He became more irritable, prone to snapping at minor inconveniences. He spent more time on his phone, but the confident swagger with which he once browsed dating sites was replaced by a furtive, almost desperate energy. He would sigh heavily, muttering under his breath about flaky people or what's wrong with everyone on these sites. He was clearly frustrated, but utterly clueless as to the source of his woes. The satisfaction I derived from these repeated acts of revenge was complex. It wasn't pure, unadulterated joy. There was still a lingering ache, a reminder of the pain he had inflicted. But it was undeniably empowering. Each time I watched him get stood up, each time I sent that final, dismissive message from a fake profile, I felt a piece of myself being reclaimed. I was no longer the heartbroken, insecure woman he had gaslighted. I was the one in control, pulling the strings, orchestrating his downfall from the shadows. He even started to confide in me, unknowingly, about his dating woes. He'd complain about how hard online dating was, how no one was serious, how he kept getting ghosted or stood up. He'd express frustration about women who seemed interested online but then disappeared or weren't what they seemed in person. I would listen, feigning sympathy, offering platitudes like, "Oh, that's so tough, I'm sorry you're going through that," all the while a cold smirk played on my lips internally. The irony was exquisite. He was seeking comfort from the very person who was orchestrating his misery. His confidence, once so unshakable, began to visibly waver. He started to question himself, something I had never seen him do before. He'd ask me, "Do you think I'm coming across wrong online? Or am I being too eager?" He even started to complain about the quality of women he was encountering, projecting his own failures onto them. The narcissist, accustomed to effortless conquest, was now facing consistent rejection, and it was clearly chipping away at his carefully constructed facade. The constant wondering, the gnawing doubt about why his charm wasn't working, was a delicious form of torture. I watched him become increasingly paranoid. He'd eye his phone with suspicion, jump at every notification, and then slump in disappointment when it wasn't the message he was hoping for. He started to scrutinize profiles more carefully, almost as if he expected to find something amiss. He was becoming exactly what he had made me: insecure, constantly questioning, perpetually on edge. The tables had truly turned. But as satisfying as this prolonged campaign was, I knew it couldn't last forever. The emotional energy required to maintain the facade, to constantly create new personas and orchestrate new encounters, was immense. More importantly, I knew that to truly move on, I needed to sever ties completely, to break free from the toxic cycle he had trapped me in. The revenge had served its purpose. It had rebalanced the scales, given me back a sense of agency, and allowed him to experience a fraction of the pain he had inflicted. But it was time for the final act, the grand finale that would bring down the curtain on our twisted relationship and leave him with an undeniable, unforgettable truth. The moment for the ultimate confrontation was approaching, and I was ready. The decision to end things was not sudden, but a quiet, resolute conclusion that solidified after weeks of orchestrating his digital downfall. The revenge had served its purpose, a bitter but necessary medicine for my wounded spirit. It had allowed me to reclaim my power, to turn the tables on the man who had so carelessly shattered my trust. But continuing the charade, living under the same roof as my tormentor, was no longer sustainable. The emotional drain, though mitigated by the satisfaction of his growing misery, was still immense. I needed to cut the cord, to sever myself completely from the toxicity that had permeated my life. I wanted the breakup to be public, just as his betrayals had been, in a sense, public, displayed openly on dating profiles for anyone to see. I wanted him to experience the same level of exposure, the same sting of humiliation, that I had felt when I discovered his cruel remarks about me. This wouldn't be a quiet, private conversation. This would be a declaration, a final, definitive statement that would leave no room for his usual gaslighting and manipulation. I chose a busy, upscale restaurant for our final dinner. It was a place he liked, a place where he often felt important and admired. The kind of place where people tended to notice others, where a scene would be impossible to ignore. I made the reservation, feigning a desire for a nice evening out, a last attempt to reconnect. He, predictably, agreed, perhaps hoping for a return to the early days of our relationship, or perhaps just enjoying the prospect of a good meal in a fancy setting. The evening arrived, heavy with unspoken tension, at least on my part. I dressed carefully, not to impress him, but to project an image of calm strength, of a woman who was finally in control. As we sat across from each other, the soft murmur of conversations and the clinking of cutlery filling the air, I felt a strange sense of detachment. He was talking, probably about his day, or some trivial complaint, but his words barely registered. My mind was focused, preparing for the moment. We ordered our food, made small talk, the usual superficial pleasantries that had become the hallmark of our strained relationship. I waited until our main courses had arrived, until the restaurant was bustling with patrons, ensuring a maximum audience for what was to come. I took a deep breath, the rich aroma of his expensive meal suddenly sickening. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, cutting through his monologue. He paused, a forkful of food halfway to his mouth. A flicker of annoyance, then perhaps a hint of apprehension, crossed his face. "What about?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "About us," I replied, meeting his gaze directly, refusing to flinch. "And about your online dating life." The color drained from his face. His fork clattered onto his plate. The casual mask he wore shattered, replaced by a mixture of shock and immediate defensiveness. He glanced around, suddenly aware of our surroundings, his eyes darting nervously to the tables around us. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice low, a forced whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you going through my phone again? You're being crazy." The gaslighting began immediately, the familiar attempt to turn the accusation back on me, to paint me as the irrational, jealous girlfriend. I leaned forward slightly, my voice clear and firm, cutting through his weak denials. "Don't bother, darling," I said, the endearment laced with icy sarcasm. "I know everything. I know about the dating sites. I know about the women. And I know about the cruel things you've said about me." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear replacing the defensiveness. He tried to interrupt, to deny, to argue, but I didn't let him. I pressed on, my voice rising slightly, just enough to carry to the surrounding tables, but still controlled. "You're a cheater," I stated, clearly, unequivocally. "And a liar. And I'm done." He slammed his hand on the table, a sudden, sharp sound that drew the attention of a few nearby diners. "You're being ridiculous," he hissed, his voice still low but laced with fury. "You're a jealous freak. You're imagining things. This is insane." He was trying to regain control, to publicly discredit me, to turn the narrative in his favor. I looked him dead in the eye, a cold, triumphant smile slowly spreading across my face. This was the moment. The culmination of weeks of planning, of silent suffering, of calculated revenge. All those failed dates. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute certainty. All those women who stood you up, or cancelled last minute, or just weren't interested after seeing you. That was all me. His face went utterly blank. The color drained from it completely, leaving him pale and stunned. His jaw dropped slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief, then a dawning horror. He looked like he had been struck by lightning, utterly speechless, utterly exposed. The public setting, the undeniable truth of my words, the sheer audacity of my revelation, it all hit him at once. He was caught, trapped, and utterly humiliated. The silence at our table, though brief, felt deafening, a vacuum created by the sudden, shocking truth. He finally managed a strangled whisper. How did you?" And then, I delivered the final, devastating blow. His question, a choked whisper of how did you, hung in the air, laced with a desperate plea for understanding, for a way to rationalize the impossible. His eyes, wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror, searched my face, trying to find a crack in my composure, a hint of a lie. But there was none. My gaze was steady, unwavering, reflecting back only the cold, hard truth. The carefully constructed facade of his life, built on a foundation of deceit, was crumbling before his very eyes, and he was powerless to stop it. The restaurant, once a comforting hum of background noise, now seemed to fade into a blur. My focus was entirely on him, on the raw, exposed vulnerability that had replaced his usual smug arrogance. This was the moment I had envisioned, the culmination of weeks of silent suffering and meticulous planning. This was the moment I reclaimed my narrative, my dignity, and my power. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, deliberate movement, allowing the full weight of my revelation to sink in. I watched his face, observing every subtle shift in his expression. The initial shock, the frantic search for an explanation, and then, the dawning realization of the sheer scale of my deception. He was trying to piece it together, trying to connect the dots of all those frustrating, inexplicable failed dates, and the truth was a bitter pill he was forced to swallow. "How?" I repeated his question, my voice calm, almost conversational, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging within him. "You really want to know how, after all this time?" I let the question hang, allowing the tension to build, drawing out his agony just a little longer. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible jerk of his head, his eyes still fixed on me, desperate for an answer, for any explanation that would make sense of the chaos I had just unleashed. And then, I delivered the final, precise blow, the one that would leave no room for doubt, no possibility of denial, no escape from the truth. I recited the password. The one he had chosen, the one I had helped him set up in the early, naive days of our relationship. The one he thought was a secret, a private key to his digital life. It was, I said, my voice clear and resonant, each word landing with the precision of a perfectly aimed dart. Your mother's maiden name, followed by your birth year, and then love. The color drained from his face again, leaving it ashen. His eyes, already wide, seemed to expand even further, reflecting a profound sense of shock and utter defeat. The specific, intimate detail of the password, something only he would know, something he had entrusted to me in a moment of vulnerability, was the undeniable proof. It wasn't just that I knew about his cheating. It was that I had been inside his world, seen his deception from the inside, and used his own tools against him. The betrayal was complete, and it was entirely his own doing. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked utterly broken, his carefully constructed persona shattered into a million pieces. The public setting, the eyes that were now undoubtedly on us, though I didn't care to look, the undeniable truth of my words, it was all too much for him. His silence was the most eloquent admission of guilt. There was no gaslighting left, no denial, no way to spin this. He was caught, exposed, and utterly humiliated. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. My mission was accomplished. I had delivered the truth, exacted my revenge, and reclaimed my power. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my movements calm and unhurried. I reached into my purse, pulled out a few bills, and placed them neatly on the table, enough to cover my half of the meal, a final gesture of independence. I looked down at him one last time, his face a mask of shock and despair. A flicker of something akin to pity, quickly extinguished, passed through me. Then, I turned and walked away. I didn't rush, didn't look back. Each step was a stride towards freedom, a definitive break from the past. The restaurant, the clinking of cutlery, the hushed whispers, they all faded into the background as I walked out, leaving him utterly alone, exposed, and defeated, in the wreckage of his own making. The final act of my revenge was complete, and the silence that followed was my ultimate victory. The months that followed the dramatic restaurant confrontation were a period of profound transition, a slow but steady process of healing and rediscovery. The initial adrenaline of the breakup and the satisfaction of delivering the final blow gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The emotional weight that had burdened me for so long began to lift, piece by agonizing piece, allowing me to breathe freely again. I moved out of our shared apartment swiftly, severing the last physical ties to a relationship that had become a source of immense pain. The act of packing my belongings, of creating a new space for myself, felt incredibly liberating. Each box I filled, each piece of furniture I arranged in my new apartment, was a step further away from the toxicity and closer to a future I could shape on my own terms. I reconnected with friends I had inadvertently distanced myself from during the relationship, their unwavering support a comforting balm to my still tender heart. They listened, they validated my feelings, and they helped me remember the vibrant, confident woman I had been before he had chipped away at my self-worth. Life, slowly but surely, began to regain its color. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, pursued new interests, and focused on my career with renewed vigor. The constant anxiety that had plagued me for months dissipated, replaced by a growing sense of calm and self-assurance. I learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to my own voice, and to prioritize my own well-being. The scars of the betrayal were still there, faint but present, a reminder of a painful lesson learned. But they no longer defined me. They were simply a part of my story, a chapter one had closed with a definitive, powerful ending. I had no contact with him in the immediate aftermath of the breakup. I blocked his number, unfriended him on all social media, and ensured there was no avenue for him to reach me. I needed that space, that complete severance, to truly heal. I didn't seek updates on his life, didn't wonder about his whereabouts. He was a closed book, a chapter one had forcefully ripped from my life's narrative. Then, several months later, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. It was from him. My heart gave a slight jolt, a momentary flicker of the old anxiety, quickly replaced by a detached curiosity. I almost deleted it unread, but a part of me, the part that still sought validation for the pain I had endured, compelled me to open it. The subject line was simple, regarding everything. I clicked it open, my finger hovering over the delete button, ready to close it at the first sign of gaslighting or manipulation. But what I read surprised me. The email was long, rambling, and filled with a strange mix of regret, bewilderment, and a chilling admission of the lasting impact of my revenge. He started by acknowledging the breakup, admitting, in a roundabout way, that he had been wrong. He didn't explicitly apologize for the cheating, not in a direct, contrite way, but he did express a convoluted sense of remorse for the pain he had caused. It was a typical narcissist's apology, focused more on his own discomfort than on my suffering. But then, the tone shifted. He began to talk about his online dating experiences after our breakup. He admitted that my revenge had been ingenious, a word that resonated with a strange, dark satisfaction within me. He confessed that he had tried to get back into online dating, but it was no longer the same. He described a pervasive sense of paranoia, a constant feeling of unease. Every time I matched with someone new, he wrote, every time I went on a first date, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept wondering, is this you again? Is this another one of your profiles? He detailed how he would scrutinize every message, every photo, searching for clues, for any subtle hint that it might be me. He spoke of the anxiety of meeting new women, of the constant fear of being stood up, of being exposed, of facing another public humiliation. He admitted that my actions had destroyed his desire for online dating, leaving him perpetually suspicious and unable to trust the authenticity of any new connection. The game he once played with such casual disregard had become a source of torment for him. He was experiencing the very insecurity, the very paranoia, the very doubt he had so cruelly inflicted upon me. The tables had not just turned, they had been utterly overturned, leaving him floundering in the digital dating world he once dominated. This was the true victory, a lasting imprint on his psyche. His email continued, a testament to the profound and lasting impact of my revenge. It wasn't just a fleeting admission of discomfort. It was a deep dive into the psychological torment he was now experiencing, a torment I had meticulously crafted for him. He described how the joy he once derived from online interactions had completely evaporated. What was once a playground for his ego had become a minefield of suspicion and anxiety. It's like I can't trust anyone anymore, he wrote, the words dripping with a self-pity that was almost laughable given his past actions. Every new profile, every new conversation, I'm analyzing it, looking for the telltale signs. Is this too good to be true? Is this a trap? Is this you? He detailed how he would spend hours poring over bias, scrutinizing profile pictures, searching for any subtle clue that might link a new match back to me. He even admitted to having cancelled dates at the last minute, not because he was busy, but because a sudden wave of paranoia would wash over him, convincing him that the woman on the other end was me, waiting to spring another trap. He spoke of the public places he used to frequent for dates, now tainted by the memory of his humiliations. He confessed that he avoided certain cafes, certain parks, certain restaurants, haunted by the spectre of his past rejections. The casual confidence he once exuded in social settings had been replaced by a nervous self-consciousness, a constant fear of being recognized, of being exposed, of facing another unexpected blow to his ego. The world, which he once navigated with such effortless charm, had become a landscape of potential pitfalls, each one a reminder of my pervasive influence. It's like you're everywhere, he wrote, a chilling admission that sent a shiver of satisfaction down my spine. Every new match, every new message, every new face. I see you. I hear you. It's driving me crazy. He confessed that the thought of me, the possibility of me being behind every new profile, had become an intrusive, obsessive thought, constantly replaying in his mind. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't escape *me*. He even admitted that his friends had noticed the change. They had questioned his sudden aversion to online dating, his newfound reluctance to meet new people. He had offered vague excuses, but he couldn't hide the underlying anxiety that now permeated his interactions. The man who had once reveled in being the life of the party, the charming center of attention, was now withdrawn, guarded, and perpetually on edge. The email then shifted to a more personal plea. He confessed that he still thought about me, about us. He spoke of the good times, selectively omitting the months of emotional abuse and betrayal. He hinted at a desire to talk things over, to understand what went wrong, to see if there's any way to fix things. It was a classic narcissist's attempt to regain control, to re-establish contact, to perhaps even lure me back into his orbit. He even tried to evoke sympathy, painting himself as the victim of a cruel twist of fate, rather than the architect of his own downfall. He ended the email by saying he knew it was a long shot, but that he had to try. He reiterated that he still thought my revenge was ingenious, a backhanded compliment that only served to highlight his continued self-absorption. He signed off with his name, followed by a wistful "thinking of you." I read the email several times, absorbing every word, every nuance. There was no genuine remorse, no true understanding of the pain he had inflicted. It was all about his discomfort, his paranoia, his inability to continue his deceptive lifestyle. But that, in itself, was the ultimate victory. He was suffering, not physically, but psychologically, in a way that truly mattered to him. His ego, his greatest asset and his most vulnerable point, had been irrevocably damaged. The email was a confirmation that my revenge had not only hit its mark but had left a permanent scar. He was living with the consequences of his actions, haunted by the very insecurity he had sown in me. And the best part? He had no one to blame but himself. I had given him the password, the key to his own undoing. And now, he was trapped in a self-made prison of paranoia. I closed the email, a profound sense of closure washing over me. This was it. The final, definitive acknowledgement of my triumph. The email sat in my inbox, a digital trophy of my silent victory. I reread it a few more times over the next few days, not out of lingering attachment, but out of a deep, satisfying confirmation that my efforts had not been in vain. Each line he wrote, detailing his paranoia and the destruction of his online dating life, was a testament to the effectiveness of my strategy. He was living with the consequences, and that was all I had ever truly wanted. But despite the profound sense of closure it brought, I knew I couldn't respond. To reply, even to acknowledge his email, would be to give him a lifeline, a sliver of hope that he could still manipulate, still engage with. It would open a door I had so painstakingly closed. My silence was the most powerful response I could offer, a final, unyielding wall against his attempts to re-enter my life. It was a statement that his words, his pleas, his attempts at self-pity, held no power over me anymore. Years passed. Life moved forward, as it always does, carrying me further and further away from the wreckage of that toxic relationship. I built a new life, one founded on authenticity, self-respect, and genuine connections. I learned to trust again, cautiously at first, then more fully, recognizing the red flags I had once ignored. I focused on my career, found new passions, and cultivated a circle of friends who genuinely cared for me. The experience, though painful, had ultimately made me stronger, more resilient, and far more discerning. Yet, despite the passage of time, the occasional email from him would still appear in my inbox. They were less frequent now, perhaps once or twice a year, but they were always there, a persistent ghost from a past I had long since left behind. Each email was a variation on the same theme, a wistful memory, a vague inquiry about my well-being, a subtle hint that he still thought of me, that he still carried the weight of our past. Sometimes, the emails were brief, almost like a test. "Hope you're doing well." Other times, they were longer, more reflective, echoing the sentiments of his first confessional email. He would mention something he saw or heard that reminded him of me, or a place we had visited. He would sometimes offer a more direct apology for his past actions, though it always felt hollow, devoid of true empathy, still tinged with a focus on his own lingering discomfort. He never explicitly mentioned the revenge again, but the undercurrent of his paranoia, the subtle acknowledgement of a life forever altered by my actions, was always present. I never replied. Not once. Each email would arrive, I would see his name in the sender field, and a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition would pass through me. Then, without opening them, without even reading the subject line beyond his name, I would simply delete them. Sometimes, I would mark them as spam, hoping to filter them out, but they always seemed to find a way through. My silence was not born of anger or bitterness anymore. Those emotions had long since faded, replaced by indifference. My silence was a deliberate choice, a powerful act of self-preservation. It was a refusal to engage, a refusal to grant him any more of my time, my energy, or my emotional space. It was a definitive statement that he no longer held any sway over me, that his attempts to re-establish contact were futile. My silence was my final victory. It was the ultimate denial of the attention he craved, the validation he sought. It was the complete and utter removal of myself from his narrative, leaving him to grapple with his own demons, his own paranoia, his own self-inflicted wounds, entirely alone. He was left to wonder, to speculate, to replay the past, while I moved forward, unburdened and free. The absence of my reply was a louder message than any words I could have written, a resounding testament to my liberation and his perpetual torment.